The COVID-19 pandemic, specific characteristics of the pandemic, and its adverse effects combine to create a devastating world event by Gabe Tiano. COVID-19, also known as coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2, is a respiratory disease that quickly spread around the world, being declared a pandemic on March 11, 2020. During the course of the pandemic, the COVID-19 virus would go on, infecting over 750 million people, killing 6 million of those people, according to the WHO. COVID-19 has been the most devastating world event in history. COVID-19 damaged many different areas of society very effectively, and how and what it affected will be further discussed in the following presentation. To start, COVID-19 damaged the economy in many ways. First, COVID-19 hit the manufacturing and worldwide shipping markets hard. Because a quarantine was imposed in many countries, traditional manufacturing processes were severely hindered or made impossible because workers could not be in a factory or even close to one another. Additionally, COVID-19 hit the entire world hard, and to the extent that the economy is interconnected, supply chains were doomed to fail. These effects hit companies, as reported by Sean Harapko, with a bachelor's degree in business logistics, who found that 57% of companies talked to in a survey reported serious disruptions caused by supply chain issues. Because of disruptions and loss of revenue, many companies were forced to lay off workers to survive, according to finance professor Gabe. These layoffs, however, created a self-perpetuating cycle in which consumers were buying less because they were laid off, which reduced company profits, beginning the cycle again. Compounding with this, consumer mentality plays a large role in the health of the economy. And according to Barua, as people become worried about their health and lives, save money avoiding unnecessary shopping, and hoard essential commodities during the lockdown, demand for essential goods is increasing. In contrast, demand for luxury or non-essential products shows a stark fall. When people don't spend money, inflation rises, which is exactly what was reported by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics graph behind me. Additionally, the COVID-19 pandemic polarized the public. First off, COVID-19 took place during an election year, and thus it was doomed to be politicized by politicians in an attempt to try and sway voters in their favor. An example of this includes wearing masks, which quickly became politicized. Supporting this writes Austin Hegler, a graduate student with a BA in Communication Studies, who writes, "Wearing masks in public quickly became a partisan symbol as Democratic elites promoted mask wearing, and Republican elites, most notably Donald Trump, dismissed it. Additionally, according to Saul Hart, professor in communication, news stations perpetuated this information because many of them are supported by members of specific political parties, inclining them to share this information to get more viewership and profit. Constituents shared this misinformation seen in the media, and by doing so, polarized themselves within groups with certain beliefs. Even after the brunt of the pandemic, the after effects of the polarization which took place are still being felt. For example, researcher Sebastian Jundrix found that political parties disagreed more after the pandemic. Also, the United Nations stated in a report that terrorist groups are now using pandemic-related socioeconomic grievances and political tensions to recruit their members. The final aspect of society which COVID-19 severely affected is mental health. Interestingly, COVID-19 touched on all points of the trifecta of damaging mental health. First, COVID-19 caused isolation. A study by Gainson, who attained a bachelor's in occupational therapy, found that social isolation due to prolonged lockdown correlated to suicidal thoughts and actions in extreme cases and depressive thoughts in less extreme cases. Additionally, isolation can lead to routine, which may also have negative mental health effects. Nelson Mandela, former South African president, states in his book, A Long Walk from Freedom, that people can fall into a routine because it can make time go faster, but that they can lose their mind in a routine. Fear was the second aspect of the pandemic that was detrimental to mental health. Many people were scared of what was to come in the pandemic and worried for their relatives and friends. No doubt, a stressful environment that has the capacity to weaken mental health. Thirdly, the incapacity and powerlessness felt by those who experienced the pandemic weakened their mental health. Supporting this, Gregory Solomon, with a master's in counseling and psychotherapy, writes that powerlessness may be described as an overwhelming feeling of helplessness or inadequacy in stressful situations, making us more susceptible to anxiety, stress, and depression. COVID-19 also worsens existing mental health conditions. For example, in an interview with NPR, an 18-year-old girl named Taja discusses how she relapsed into anorexia because she couldn't go to school due to the pandemic. COVID-19 also prevented many common coping mechanisms that people use. In a study researching resiliency in Haitians after the 2012 earthquake, researchers found that cultural factors such as family, traditional food, and spiritual factors contribute to the ability of Haitians to continue to cope with traumatic events, including disasters. Because of the fact that people had to quarantine during the pandemic, they could not use family or spiritual factors such as going to religious services to cope with the negative effects of the pandemic. To summarize, COVID-19 damaged three core pillars of society: the economy, politics, and mental health. The pandemic had special attributes which allowed it to do this. COVID-19 was globally economically disruptive, and it was able to change consumer behavior, which contributed to the damaging of the economy when people stopped spending and inflation rose. The pandemic also took place during an election year, which allowed it to be weaponized by politicians and exploited by the media. Finally, COVID-19 damaged mental health and prevented coping with commonly used coping mechanisms.